This was supposed to be the calm before the rebuild. Instead, one report flipped the entire conversation on its head. An ESPN Browns beat reporter, someone who covers the team every single day, dropped a line that sent Cleveland fans into disbelief. The Cleveland Browns, according to the report, still need to solve their quarterback problem. Not next year, not down the road, now. And that statement alone carries weight because beat reporters don't speak into the void. They speak with access. Here, why this hits so hard. The Browns already have a rookie quarterback who didn't just survive his first season, he competed. Shedeur Sanders stepped into one of the worst offensive situations in football and still showed poise, toughness, and late-game composure. No elite protection, no consistent run game, no margin for error. And yet, when the pressure peaked, he didn't fold. So when an insider-connected report suggests Cleveland might already be looking elsewhere, it raises a much bigger question. Is this about football evaluation, or something deeper happening inside the building? Because leaks like this don't happen by accident. They're planted, they're framed, and most importantly, they usually serve a purpose. When a narrative like, "we still need a quarterback," starts circulating, it often means someone with influence wants that idea normalized before draft season even begins. That's what makes this situation unsettling. Not the possibility of competition, but the timing, the tone, the sudden willingness to downplay what Sanders just showed under impossible circumstances. And when you dig into how he ended up in Cleveland in the first place, the story starts to feel less like uncertainty and more like unfinished business. Reports suggest not everyone in the organization was aligned on drafting him. Some believe the strongest supporter wasn't the front office at all, but the owner himself, Jimmy Haslam. If that's true, this leak isn't just analysis, it's a signal. And once you see it that way, everything that follows starts to look a lot more intentional. It started with one sentence, and it hit harder than any loss this season. An ESPN Browns beat reporter, someone who lives inside that building year-round, wrote that Cleveland still needs to solve its quarterback situation. Not reevaluate, not add depth, solve. And that single word is what sent fans spiraling. Because when a beat reporter talks like that, it's not just opinion. These reporters don't float bold claims without sourcing. They're plugged into front offices, coaching staffs, and decision makers. They're fed information, sometimes subtly, sometimes directly. So when ESPN frames the Browns as still searching for a franchise quarterback, it immediately raises eyebrows across the league. The problem, that framing doesn't match what people watched on Sundays. Shedeur Sanders didn't look like a quarterback who needed replacing. He looked like a rookie learning on the fly in one of the most unforgiving situations in football, behind shaky protection, with a run game that disappeared for weeks at a time, throwing to receivers who struggled to separate and at times struggled to hold onto the ball. And yet, the game never looked too big for him. That's why the ESPN wording felt personal to a lot of fans. It didn't just criticize performance, it dismissed context. It grouped Sanders into the same old Browns quarterback carousel, as if nothing had changed. As if this was just another failed experiment instead of a player showing real growth under pressure. What made it worse was how confident the report sounded. There was no hesitation, no acknowledgement of development, just a clean conclusion. Cleveland is still hunting for its answer. And when language that's strong appears this early in the offseason, it usually means someone inside the organization wants it out there. That's how narratives are built before draft season. You soften the ground, you prepare the audience, you make bold moves feel inevitable instead of controversial. And that's why this report didn't feel like analysis, it felt like positioning. Fans weren't just reacting to what was said, they were reacting to what it implied. That despite the flashes, despite the progress, despite the circumstances, Sanders may never have been fully embraced internally. That the organization might already be distancing itself from a player who hasn't even had a fair runway yet. which leads to the real concern. If this message is coming from inside the building, then the debate around the Browns' future isn't about talent, it's about belief. And once belief is missing, the direction of a franchise can shift fast. This is the part that keeps getting ignored, and honestly, it's the most important piece of the entire conversation. Because evaluating what Shedeur Sanders did last season without acknowledging the situation around him completely misses the point. Start with protection. By most metrics and film breakdowns, the Cleveland Browns' offensive line struggled badly in pass protection. Pressures came early. Pockets collapsed fast. There were stretches where Sanders had barely 2 seconds to make a decision before defenders were in his face. That's not an inconvenience for a rookie quarterback. That's survival mode. And yet, he stayed composed. Now look at the run game, or rather, the lack of one. Defenses didn't respect it. They didn't have to. That meant more blitzes, more exotic looks, more pressure packages designed specifically to overwhelm a young quarterback who couldn't simply hand the ball off and reset the offense. Sanders was forced to throw into predictable situations over and over again. Then there were the weapons. Injuries, drops, and constant rotation made chemistry almost impossible to establish. Key targets missed time. Others struggled with consistency. Late in the season, Sanders was throwing to players who had barely been part of the regular rotation weeks earlier. These weren't ideal conditions for growth. They were obstacles stacked on top of each other. And still, the moment showed up. He made tight window throws under pressure. He extended plays just long enough to give routes a chance to develop. He didn't panic when things broke down. Most importantly, in high-leverage moments, he didn't shrink. Late-game drives didn't look rushed. They looked controlled. That matters, especially for a rookie. This wasn't about flashy numbers or highlight reel stats. It was about traits, poise, toughness, processing speed, the ability to stay mentally steady when the offense around you isn't functioning the way it's supposed to. Those are the qualities teams spend years trying to find, and Cleveland saw them in real time. That's why the push to lump Sanders into the same category as past Browns quarterbacks feels lazy. This wasn't failure masked by excuses. This was a quarterback showing real, tangible growth while operating under one of the highest degrees of difficulty in the league. And when you judge it through that lens, the conversation shifts. Because instead of asking whether Sanders is the guy, the smarter question becomes whether Cleveland has done enough to actually give him a fair chance to prove it. And that question leads directly to what happened long before he ever took his first NFL snap. To understand why this situation feels so uncomfortable now, you have to go back to draft weekend, because that's where the tension really started. Long before Shedeur Sanders ever took an NFL snap, there were already cracks forming inside the Browns' decision-making process. According to multiple reports and league chatter, the Cleveland Browns football operations staff never viewed Sanders as a priority. Not in the first round, not in the second, not even close. He wasn't part of their early quarterback plans, and by most accounts, they were comfortable letting him slide deep into the draft or out of their reach entirely. Then something changed. As the rounds passed and Sanders kept slipping, it's been said that the push to draft him didn't come from scouts or coaches. It came from the top. Jimmy Haslam reportedly stepped in and made the call to take him. Whether that decision was driven by football belief, long-term upside, or the buzz that comes with drafting a high-profile name is still debated. What matters is this: the pick wasn't fully aligned. And when alignment is missing on draft day, resentment doesn't disappear, it waits. Front offices are built on evaluations. Careers rise and fall on being right. So when a quarterback is selected despite internal resistance, that player enters the building under a microscope. Every mistake confirms doubt. Every success gets minimized. That's not conspiracy. That's human nature in NFL war rooms. This is why the fifth-round pick label keeps getting repeated. It's not just about draft position. It's a reminder, a subtle way of saying, this wasn't our guy. And once that mindset takes hold, it becomes incredibly hard to shake, even when the tape starts telling a different story. What makes this worse is timing. Sanders wasn't drafted into a stable environment. He walked into an offense already struggling, behind a shaky line with constant changes around him. Instead of being developed patiently, he was evaluated harshly. Instead of being protected, he was tested immediately. And now, months later, those same early doubts appear to be leaking back into the public conversation. Not loudly, not officially, but through carefully worded reports suggesting the Browns still need a quarterback. That's why this feels bigger than performance. This isn't just about what Sanders has or hasn't done on the field. It's about an organization wrestling with the possibility that its original evaluation might have been wrong. And for some decision makers, admitting that is harder than starting over. Because once a front office decides it never believed in a player to begin with, the clock on that player starts ticking, no matter how well he plays. Once you strip away the emotions, the leaks, and the pride, the football logic behind drafting another quarterback completely falls apart. And that's what makes this situation so frustrating. From a roster-building standpoint, it doesn't just feel unnecessary, it feels reckless. Start with the draft board itself. The Browns are projected to pick near the top, but this isn't a quarterback-rich class at the top end. Reports suggest one clear elite prospect is likely gone before Cleveland even gets on the clock. After that, the talent drop-off is steep. You're no longer talking about slam-dunk franchise quarterbacks, you're talking about projection picks, developmental players, guys who would need time, patience, and, ironically, the same infrastructure that Cleveland hasn't even built yet. So ask the obvious question. Why reach for another quarterback when you already have one showing real signs of growth? The Cleveland Browns have far more urgent problems. The offensive line has been inconsistent at best and disastrous at worst. Pass protection has routinely collapsed, forcing the quarterback into survival mode. That's not how you evaluate young talent. That's how you ruin it. Drafting an elite tackle or interior lineman would immediately change how the entire offense functions. Then there's the receiving core. Drops, injuries, lack of separation. These aren't minor issues, they're drive killers. A rookie quarterback throwing to unreliable targets doesn't suddenly become better when you replace him with another rookie quarterback throwing to the same unreliable targets. The result stays the same. This is where the logic breaks. Drafting another QB doesn't fix the environment, it adds another victim to it. Even worse, it sends a message. It tells the locker room that performance doesn't matter, that growth doesn't matter, that surviving chaos isn't enough. And when players see that, belief erodes fast. Veterans stop buying in. Young players start pressing. Stability disappears before it ever forms. There's also the financial and developmental side. Cleveland has limited years to build efficiently before contracts stack up. Using a premium pick on a quarterback resets the clock in the worst way, splitting reps, creating tension, and delaying clarity. Instead of building around a core, you create another competition that benefits no one. And let's be honest, if the Browns truly believed the quarterback room was the issue, the solution wouldn't be a rushed draft pick. It would be support, protection, weapons, structure. Drafting another quarterback at the top wouldn't signal confidence or boldness. It would signal panic. It would confirm that Cleveland still doesn't know how to commit to a plan once it's in motion. And that's the real danger here. Not missing on a pick, but repeating the same mistake that's haunted this franchise for decades, changing the quarterback instead of fixing everything around him. This is where the conversation stops being about film and starts being about ego. Because when you look closely at what's happening around the Cleveland Browns, the disconnect doesn't feel strategic, it feels personal. NFL front offices are built on evaluations. Scouts stake their careers on them. Executives protect them, coaches defend them, and when a player succeeds despite not being their guy, it creates an uncomfortable reality. Someone has to admit they were wrong, and in this league, being wrong carries consequences far beyond pride. That's why the noise around the quarterback position feels so calculated. The timing isn't accidental. These leaks didn't surface after a disastrous performance. They surfaced after signs of real progress, after moments that forced people inside the building to reevaluate their original stance. Instead of embracing that development, the narrative shifted toward minimizing it. This is how organizations quietly protect themselves. You repeat the draft position. You emphasize the flaws. You lower expectations publicly so that success looks accidental and failure looks inevitable. It's not sabotage in the traditional sense, but it is positioning. What makes this even more telling is where the message appears, not from official statements, not from press conferences, but through carefully worded reports that frame uncertainty as logic. Still need to solve the quarterback position. That phrase isn't about improvement, it's about distancing. Because if the Browns fully commit and it works, credit shifts. It moves away from evaluators who passed and toward those who believed later, or toward ownership. And that matters more than fans want to admit. Speaking of ownership, this is where Jimmy Haslam quietly looms over everything. Owners don't forget when they're overridden, or when they override others. And they certainly don't forget when they're proven right. That dynamic alone can fracture alignment inside a building, especially when leadership changes are already in motion. This is why it doesn't feel like a football debate anymore. If it were, the conversation would be about protection, scheme, and development. Instead, it's about labels, optics, resetting the clock. And that's the dangerous part. When a franchise prioritizes being right over getting it right, progress stalls. Players feel it, coaches sense it, fans eventually see it. Cleveland has lived this cycle before, moving on too early, starting over too often, and never letting growth fully take root. So the real question is whether the Browns can draft another quarterback. It's whether they're willing to admit that the answer they've been searching for might already be in the building, and that admitting it would mean confronting some uncomfortable truths. Because the moment this becomes about protecting past decisions instead of building future success, the outcome stops being about football altogether. No matter how loud the leaks get or how aggressive the narratives become, there's one reality that overrides everything else in Cleveland: ownership. And in this situation, that changes the entire power dynamic. Jimmy Haslam isn't just another voice in the room, he's the final one. Coaches can be fired, general managers can be replaced, scouting departments can be reshuffled. The owner can't. And that matters more right now than any ESPN report or anonymous quote floating around draft season. Multiple reports and long-running league speculation suggest that Haslam was the strongest advocate for drafting Shedeur Sanders in the first place. While parts of the football operations staff were hesitant, it's been said that Haslam believed in Sanders' upside, toughness, and leadership, and stepped in when the moment came. Whether people inside the building liked that or not, the pick was made, and now the results are on tape. That creates a critical fork in the road. If Sanders succeeds, it validates ownership's belief and exposes the miss by the evaluators who didn't want him. And that's exactly why ownership support matters so much for a young quarterback. When the owner believes in you, you get time, you get resources, you get patience. More importantly, you get a reset around you instead of being quietly replaced. This is also why the timing of these leaks feels suspicious. The Browns are already in transition, coaching changes, front office uncertainty. That usually means a shift in philosophy is coming. And when that happens, ownership plays a much heavier role in shaping the direction, especially at quarterback. From Haslam's perspective, this is simple. He spent years watching the Browns cycle through quarterbacks without ever committing fully to development. He's watched talent get blamed for structural failures. If he believes Sanders can be the guy with proper support, then the next move isn't replacing him, it's building around him. That's why ownership belief outweighs front office doubt. A new head coach changes everything. A new system changes everything. A rebuilt offensive line changes everything. And if Haslam is involved in choosing the next leadership group, it's far more likely they'll be aligned with developing Sanders than undermining him. This is the part critics overlook. These leaks may not be coming from the future of the organization. They may be coming from the past, from people who know their influence is fading and want their evaluations protected before they're gone. At the end of the day, quarterbacks don't survive because everyone agrees on them. They survive because the person at the top commits. And right now, the one person in Cleveland who cannot be removed still believes. That alone makes all the difference. This is one of those crossroads moments franchises don't always recognize until it's already passed them by. For the Cleveland Browns, this offseason isn't just about draft picks or coaching hires. It's about finally deciding who they are. Right now, Cleveland has two paths in front of them. One is familiar, panic early, chase the next quarterback, convince themselves the problem is always under center instead of around him. It's the path they've walked for decades, and it's why the word reset feels permanently attached to this organization. The other path is harder, but smarter. That path requires acknowledging what's actually on the tape. Shedeur Sanders didn't just survive his rookie season. He showed command in chaos. He showed toughness when protection collapsed. He showed composure in moments that usually expose young quarterbacks. That doesn't guarantee superstardom, but it absolutely earns commitment. This is where belief matters more than talent. Quarterbacks don't develop in neutral environments. They develop when organizations choose patience over pride, when mistakes are corrected instead of weaponized, when growth is supported instead of questioned through leaks. That's why ownership looms so large in this moment. Jimmy Haslam is the one constant in Cleveland's constant change. And if he truly believes Sanders is the quarterback to build around, then this offseason should reflect that belief in every move: coaching, protection, weapons, and scheme. Because drafting another quarterback doesn't solve uncertainty. It multiplies it. It divides reps. It fractures locker rooms. It delays answers. And worst of all, it tells the current quarterback that no matter what he shows, it will never be enough. This is the decision that will define Cleveland's next 5 years. Either they break the cycle, build the offensive line, upgrade the receivers, hire leadership aligned with development, and give Sanders a real runway, or they repeat history and wonder again why nothing ever sticks. And here's the part no one wants to admit. If Cleveland gets this wrong, it won't just cost them a season. It could cost them a quarterback who has already proven he can handle pressure most rookies never survive. Moments like this separate serious organizations from unstable ones, not because the choice is obvious, but because it requires courage. Courage to admit past evaluations were flawed. Courage to commit before perfection arrives. Courage to let growth play out instead of restarting the clock. The Browns are on the clock now, not just in the draft, but in identity. And years from now, this won't be remembered as the offseason where Cleveland debated quarterbacks. It'll be remembered as the moment they either finally learned or proved they never will.